The government and the opposition continue to be poles apart on the asylum seeker issue. The government's been forced to ship 200 bunk beds to Christmas Island as the flow of asylum seekers continues. Just over 1,000 asylum seekers are being held on the island, and with more on the way, the island is nearing its capacity of 1,200 detainees.
The push factors have been well demonstrated and illustrated in the conflicts and troubles that are occurring around the globe at the present time. We've seen a 30% increase in refugees since 2006 through these circumstances, so it's no surprise that there would be an increase in the numbers of people seeking to come to Australia.
However, the opposition says the government is in denial over the problem.
Since they started softening up the border protection measures, there's been 41 boats. There's been almost 2,000 people who've put their lives at risk. We've got situations where people have literally burnt boats, and those people have gone on to actually gain asylum.
Well, joining us now is Professor James Hathaway, the Dean of Law at the University of Melbourne and a leading authority on international refugee law. Professor, thank you for your time. Well, plenty of emotion and debate over this issue, and our politicians appear to be poles apart, but are they?
I think not, actually. When Philip Ruddock said in the paper this morning that this was Kevin Rudd's version of the Pacific solution, he's quite right. Both the former government and the current government, to my view, are acting in ways that are patently illegal and absolutely contrary to the principles of the treaty they've agreed to abide by.
So you don't think there's been a softening of the measures since Labor came to power?
Oh, there's clearly been a softening. I mean, the hideous measures of the Howard era, the illegal detention, the inability to access judicial remedies, all of those truly horrific and flagrantly illegal policies the Rudd government has ended. But the point is, it's not open to this government any more than it was open to the Howard government to decide to deny access to people who are legitimately entitled to seek protection from Australia under a treaty we freely signed. So the spirit of what's going on now, buying off Indonesia and other states to dump people who are in search of protection into states that we know haven't even signed the Refugee Convention, is as flagrantly objectionable now as what the prior government did under its Pacific solution.
You're, of course, referring to the PM calling the Indonesian president, asking him to intervene with that boatload the other day.
Well, apparently it's going to go beyond that, that we're going to start providing technical assistance to Indonesia, we're going to deal with customs controls, we're going to provide them with what's called capacity building. Effectively, what we're going to be doing is subcontracting out the Pacific solution to a state that we know hasn't even agreed to be bound by the same protection norms that we have. So we're dumping people into a black hole with full knowledge of the consequences.
Surely for us in Australia it has to be a balancing act between humanitarian and political considerations.
Well, I don't really think so, not between humanitarian and political. We've agreed to accept people who have a well-founded fear of being persecuted. We've agreed not to send them away. You know, the numbers we're talking about here are infinitesimal. When Philip Ruddock talks about it, maybe 2,000 people this year, that's as many people as arrive in South Africa seeking asylum in 15 minutes. And that's as many as a wealthy country like Australia receives in an entire year. We host roughly 1/10 of 1% of the world's refugees. We ought to be embarrassed, quite frankly, to be saying that we're under siege when we have a couple of thousand people arriving to seek asylum in a country with our wealth and ability, not taking account of the fact that we were one of the signatories to drafters of the treaty that entitles people to come here directly and seek protection. When the Prime Minister talks about cracking down on illegal immigration, he should be ashamed of himself. This is not illegal immigration. This is legal, authorized seeking of asylum under a treaty that we are a part of. There is nothing illegal about this, and we should stop using rhetoric like that.
So what's the solution then? Obviously, as we're seeing, Christmas Island is not going to be capable to take many more asylum seekers.
Right. Well, look, the government has talked about bringing asylum seekers to the mainland, which is what most other countries do. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. We've made a decision that we want to keep people off on Christmas Island. We're not bound by that. We can do whatever we want. We can bring them to the mainland, process them in the way that we ought reasonably to do, and that's a sensible policy option. I mean, there is a duty under the Refugee Convention not to arbitrarily detain people seeking asylum. As soon as we know who they are, we've satisfied ourselves as to security concerns and identity, there's an obligation. This is not a discretionary matter. There's an obligation to allow those people to await the determination of their claims in our communities, and that's what we should be doing.
So overall, would you say that Australia's approach to asylum seekers greatly differs to that of other countries?
Well, as among the developed world, we are one of the absolute bottom tier in terms of what we do for refugees. The numbers who arrive here are insignificant, and we've never followed through on the rhetoric of working to do more effective burden and responsibility sharing with countries in the less developed world that receive thousands of times as many refugees as we do. This was promised by the prior government. It was promised by the current government. If Australia honestly believes that the refugee protection system is broken, it should have the courage of its convictions. It should lead by example. It should call for a new system to share out refugee burdens and responsibilities around the world. But I can guarantee you that no credible system of that kind would have Australia receiving fewer than the 2,000 measly number of refugees that we're receiving right now. That's not a major commitment. It's one of the lowest in the industrialized world.
Yeah, plenty more to discuss. All right, Professor James Hathaway, we appreciate your time on Sky News. Thank you.
You're very welcome.